Ladies, gentlemen, good morning. This is Germinal Van. Uh, this video is more like a talk. It's me talking to you guys directly to share with you guys my experience, my intellectual experience. How did I get into economics? Because for those who know me personally, I always wanted to become a politician. I always wanted to run for office. That's one of the reasons why I studied political science rather than anything else. I was adamantly convinced that being the president of my country was my call. That's what I would do, and I'm going to study politics and go back home in Ivory Coast and change my country and my society. But as you grow older, you started to understand some stuff that I will not get into it in this video. It's more like personal that made me change my decision to no longer pursue a political career back in Ivory Coast. But what I can say is that as you grow older, the many stuff that you start to understand. And I must say that I used to see politics from a romantic standpoint. As you're younger, especially that when you have political ideas, you tend to romanticize these ideas and thinking that you are going to be that hero that will change the world. But as you grow older, you experience things in life, and your experiences humbles you, and you start having a more realistic approach. You start measuring things and understand what you can do at your level that is possible, and the things that you cannot do. So when I became a scholar, a writer in 2018, my writings were essentially about legal philosophy, political philosophy, and political science in general, anything political. But at the same time, in 2018, that's when I started developing a very strong interest for economics. And in fact, the way I transitioned from political science to economics was through libertarianism. Because what is interesting about libertarianism is that it's a political philosophy that is very, very ingrained into economics. And so it was easier for someone like me who did not have a background in economics to get accustomed to the field and to the philosophy of economics in general. So by by my fourth book, I started to have a more extensive understanding of economics. I was watching a lot of videos from Hayek, Mises, Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman, George Stigler, and all these guys. So Chicago School and Austrian School. And I wrote my very first book of economics, which was more about economics and political philosophy combined. It's called The Efficiency of Capitalism. And in this book, I was leaning more as an Austrian philosophically. I used to agree more with the Austrian, and as I was developing my understanding of economics, I used to approach economics from a philosophical standpoint, and I think it's even the best way to understand economics is to always approach economics at first when you are a novice in the field, is to understand the basic concepts, the basic principles of the field, the basic laws. And there is no other way to understand that but through philosophy. So I started to write a lot about economics from my fifth book, so the efficiency of capitalism, all the way to now. I mean, at first it was pure political philosophy, so I was using political philosophy to explain economic phenomena. And by my, let's say, by my 13th book, that's when a radical change happened. And it was in my 13th book, which is the economic development of West Africa in the 21st century, that I started including more mathematics and economic modeling in my books. So what has happened? And so what has happened was that I made an intellectual shift, in fact. As I said, I used to lean more toward the Austrian school. I've always agreed with some of the Austrian ideas, such as the Austrian business cycle, time preference, and stuff like that. They're very realistic, of course. But I felt that when it comes to economic analysis, using political philosophy to perform an economic analysis was not a good approach. And the reason why is because when you use political philosophy to make an economic analysis, you are already biased. And you try to use your personal ideology, what you believe in, to explain economic phenomena. But sometimes, not even sometimes, most of the time, the evidence don't point to what you believe. The evidence are actually contrary to your political philosophy. So it was difficult for me to test a theory empirically just by using political philosophy. And on top of that, if there is one thing I don't like, is to be dogmatic about abstract ideas and abstract reasoning. And I felt that that's what I was becoming. I knew that I was having a strong understanding of economics, but at the same time, I felt like I was becoming dogmatic in my views, and I was becoming more radical, and I was even flirting to some extent with anarcho capitalism. But I always challenge myself to read books that I do not agree with to understand the other perspective. So it was by doing that I started reading more Keynesian books to understand how Keynesians think and why they believe that the government should intervene. Because at the end of the day, it's important to understand that yes, we cannot separate the politics from the economics. But when it comes to pure economic analysis, when it comes to the analytical perception of economics, there is no ideology there. And that's when I started divorcing ideologically with the Austrian school. Because my 13th book, which I said, which is called the Economic Development of West Africa in the 21st Century, the subtitle of that book is A Theoretical and Neoclassical Analysis. So I transitioned from Austrian school to neoclassical, so mainly the Chicago school, but overall I'm a neoclassical, because in neoclassical economics you have that opportunity to measure your theory. And for me, who never studied economics formally, I trained myself by digging in the field, understanding the economic laws that govern the field. But it wasn't sufficient. When you want to be considered as a serious economist, it is important to use analytical tools, because that's what economics has become. Mathematics is heavily used in the field. Statistics is heavily used in the field. And on top of that, the thing is, I've always said I see economics as a positive science, because we deal a lot with quantities. When you see wages, income, consumption, uh, what else? Output, production, and all all these terms are based on quantitative concepts. So something that is based on quantitative concept is measurable. That's why I realized that if I wanted to become an economist, a real economist, a serious economist, and be taken seriously by everyone, I need to learn how to use analytical tools in mathematics. So I started training myself in mathematics and statistics. The last time I did math officially was in high school. That was 11 years ago. In college, I studied political science, so I barely did math. So I did that transition from a qualitative mindset from a qualitative approach to a quantitative approach. And when I was an Austrian, I was writing papers. I would submit papers to economic journals, and I would get rejected like immediately. And most of those journals, they were having the same feedback. You did not use any analytical or empirical tool to support your theoretical claims. So I was like, I need to actually train myself. So that's what I did. So I started training myself in, as I said, mathematics and statistics to bring my skills up to date. And once I was able to do that, for those who have my books, for those who are following my intellectual journey, they've seen that from my 13th book and onward, they became very, very heavy. Like they became math and statistics heavy. And that's when I dig into econometrics, because measurement is something that I always valued, and you cannot measure a theory with reason. You cannot measure a theory with political philosophy. So when I started training myself in econometrics, what I learned was that econometrics will challenge your beliefs. Whether you're a Keynesian or a free marketeer, econometrics will challenge your belief. You believe, for instance, that property rights leads to economic growth. Of course, this makes sense. You say, sure, the more access to property we have, the more freedom we have, because we can exchange the goods and services that we own, and then that can create growth for everybody. But this is all a qualitative statement. You have to prove it, that what you're saying is actually valid. So I wrote my first paper in econometrics in last year, where I tried to prove that property rights leads to economic growth, specifically in the context of Africa. So if Africans start valuing more property rights, it will contribute enormously to their economic development. So I wrote the paper and I tested my theory, and my theory was valid. I have to say that it was one of the greatest satisfactions I ever had, because you have your theory and you measure it, and you so it's not about speculation. You're not speculating. You're saying, like, this is what I think is true. But in order to prove that what I think is true, I have to test it. Again, economics is a positive science because it deals essentially with quantities. And we can always measure quantities. That's the whole point of it. William Stanley Jevons used to say that anything that deals with quantities is necessarily mathematical. And that's what economics is. So economics came very easy to me, like very easily to me. And I have to admit that I've never written a pure paper of political science. Yes, I'm a political scientist by training, because I have degrees in it. but I don't really practice it. What I practice is economics. What I do is economics. I live and breathe and think economics every day. And the funny thing is that I never ever thought once in my life that becoming an economist would be my vocation. Never. Even majoring in economics at the university did not even cross my mind once. Not even. It was politics or nothing, and I minored in philosophy. So for me to be an economist today is probably one of the greatest intellectual satisfactions that I ever achieved, I must say. And this is thanks to all these economists that I follow and I learn from. And there's one thing I'd like to touch on is public choice theory. So the reason I love public choice theory is because it helps me reconcile political science and economics together. And I've strongly encouraged people to follow James McGill Buchanan, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1986 for his book, The Calculus of Consent, that he wrote with Gordon Tullock. This book is probably the most groundbreaking book I ever read in my life. It is extremely analytical. James Buchanan, he was an analytical man, a real theorist who would use those analytical tools to prove his point. And the beauty of public choice theory is that you use economic tools to examine problems in political science. So it completely detaches you from the romantic aspect of politics. Because as I said at the beginning, I used to approach politics from a romantic standpoint. I used to have a idealized approach to politics, like the man who will run for office and he will suddenly save people's lives and try to improve people's life. And then when you read the calculus of consent, you realize that politicians are not that different from the entrepreneur in the private sector. That politicians are human beings like all of us. They have their own motives. They're self-interested people who run for office. Maybe if they have good intents, the primary and the very first intent why they run for office is never for benevolent reasons. It's at the end of the day because they want to maximize their own utility. So, and this is the neoclassical framework also upon which public choice theory was built. So that's why I'm very into public choice theory and political economy, because it helps me still being connected to political science, although I still use economic tools to investigate those theories. But I must say that I am more or less or fundamentally an economist, and I'm more like I lean more toward the practical side of economics than the theoretical side. The theory is fascinating, it is very important, but to me, I feel that the theory alone is not enough to prove that your point is valid. You always have to test the theory. Testing the theory is what makes the theory more than ever credible. Because the theory may sound good, logical, extremely well construed, or constructed, should I say. But all of these are fine, but if you don't measure it to bring some empirical content to it, it's not valid. And in economics specifically, you can, because we deal with quantities. It's not, I will never say we have to use statistical tools in philosophy. It doesn't make sense. Philosophy, it's all about seeking wisdom, and wisdom is about rationality, it's about thinking, it's about developing your critical thinking. But economics is a positive science. It's about measuring economic variables and testing relationship and see if there is a correlation. So that's why getting to econometrics was pretty easy for me. And I want to encourage everybody, those who are fascinated by economics, and specifically who want to become economists, to make that move forward, to not just stick by the philosophical side, because people always make that mistake that because they understand economics, they think that they can do it. There's a difference between you understand something and you can do something. It's not because you understand economics that you can do economics. To prove that you can do economics, you have to use economic models, you have to use empirical tools, and you have to publish. And we have to see your work. There are plenty of research platforms such as ResearchGate, research papers in economics. You have journals, professional journals in economics, and you have the Social Science Network Research, which is also a great platform for researchers to post their work there. So if you want to become an economist and you want to get that legitimacy, you have to make that switch. You cannot stay in the qualitative, normative, philosophical side and claim that you are doing economics. You're not. You just understand certain concepts in economics, but you're not doing it. To do economics, you have to make that transition. So it's important for people to read books that they don't agree with, because it will open up their mind about certain things that they probably ignored. And that's how my intellectual development has occurred. I was reading a lot of Austrian books at first, specifically Hayek, Mises, and then I started transitioning when I started reading more Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. And I read that article by Milton Friedman about the methodology of positive economics, which was groundbreaking for me also because it completely changed my approach to economic methodology. So that was very important. That completely shifted my understanding of economics. So it is important to read books that you don't agree with. Even read some Marxist books too, because if you want to argue with Marxists, there is one book that I recommend. Is called The Analytical Foundations of Marxian Economics. So read everything that you can. Of course, stick to your ideas, but do not do economics with political philosophy. You do not prove an economic theory by using ideology. It is very important. I want people to understand and remember that you cannot claim that your theory is valid by using ideology and political philosophy to make your claims. You need evidence. You need to measure your statements. You need to measure your statements with the data. And the data has to support what you're saying. If it doesn't support what you're saying, it means that you have to refine your statement. You have to change your assumptions. That's what it's about. So that's pretty much what I want to tell you guys about my intellectual development, how I switched from political science to economics, and how I moved from the Austrian side to the neoclassical side, and how I got into econometrics and etc. I will try to make another video where I will talk about economics between being a moral philosophy and being a predictive science. So, of course, those who know me know that I lean more toward the predictive science part, but I would not say that economics is necessarily and fundamentally predictive science, but it has its fair share in predictive analysis. So, but I will make a video about that. That would be more detailed, and let me know in the comment what you guys think. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Until then, see you guys soon.